And I have copies of the 147. All right, so it's got it time.
We are live.
Good morning. Today is Friday, May 6th, 2022. It's 8:40 a.m. and we're taking up Bill S-148, an act relating to environmental justice, which the House has returned to us with a proposal of amendment. And wanted to go over with council what they think to it. So good morning, Ms. Chakowski. Thank you very much. Can you walk us through the proposed changes?
Sure. Thanks. Good morning, Ellen Jakowski, Office of Legislative Counsel. Unless, did you give one for Weston?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, today posted on your website is a side-by-side of as passed by the Senate and as proposed by the House, because I did this before it officially passed, but this is what passed the House for the S-148, the Environmental Justice Bill. So the House made a number of changes to the bill. However, most of them I don't think are not entirely substantive. They really are structural changes. They reorganize the bill.
Okay.
So the changes are in yellow. So first, in section 1, the House removed 2 of the findings. They thought that referencing the national issues were they struck 2 findings that were related to the national issues.
Okay.
They wanted to keep this specific to Vermont.
Right. Well, we have 5 pages of findings before, so I'm sure we have plenty still. Okay, thank you.
Next, they added a new section, which is a purpose section. The purpose of this chapter is to identify, reduce, and eliminate, I'm at the bottom of page 1 still. Reduce and eliminate environmental health disparities to improve the health and well-being of all Vermont residents. On page 2, they made very minor changes to the definitions. First, they broke the definition of environmental benefits into 2 sentences for ease of reading. They did that again in environmental burdens and also added the word impacts. So examples of environmental burdens include climate change impacts.
I think that was a change you had hoped to make before, because it was a long, awkward sentence.
Yes, well, I did not. I absolutely did not.
Oh, you didn't?
No. Representative Carrie Dolan is very active and passionate about environmental justice and proposed almost all of these changes herself. Again, on page 3 of the document, in the definition of environmental justice, it has been just some clarifying language has been added for again ease of reading. And then there is a change part towards the end of the definition of environmental justice. The last sentence of it reads, environmental justice requires providing a proportional amount of resources for community revitalization, ecological restoration, resilience planning, and a just recovery.
Proportional to what? Is that I get where it's going, but I'm not sure.
Sorry, I didn't finish reading that sentence. So yes, a just recovery to communities most affected by environmental burdens and natural disasters. So proportional spending to communities affected by environmental burdens and natural disasters.
So the more affected you are, the larger proportion of the assistance you should get for attention.
The other change another change they made is they changed the definition of environmental justice population to environmental justice focused population. I think they thought this helped clarify what was actually going on, since the characteristics of those populations didn't necessarily have to do with environmental justice specifically.
That's why you're looking at this, for naming this group or defining this group as the focus of your attention.
Another small change in the definition of limited English proficiency. So limited English proficiency means a household that does not have a member 14 years or older who speaks English very well, as defined by the U.S. Census Bureau. The your definition had an adult. The U.S. Census Bureau actually does specify member 14 years or older, so it's to match the federal definition again.
Okay.
Next, so then the House made a series of structural changes to reorganize the language you already had. So the first thing they did is they made the environmental justice state policy its own standalone section.
Okay.
And then created a new section after that listed all of the steps, that all the steps that agencies have to take.
Okay. But engagement plan.
The other thing they did, and your committee has looked at this a little bit, but they defined, we had the long discussion about agencies, which agencies.
Who's out.
Yes, so they added the definition of covered agencies.
Okay.
So that's a defined term. It's still the same list of agencies you had, and that was inserted everywhere else where those
So
words.
we could just refer to covered agencies. And then, great.
Yes. Yep. And so that brings us down on page 4. A small change in the subsection C, in the community engagement plan section. So each plan shall describe how the agency plans to provide meaningful participation in compliance with Title VI. Your language was each plan shall describe how the agency plans to facilitate equitable participation and support, etc. Meaningful participation is a defined term under this bill, so this was consolidating those words to use the defined term that makes sense.
So you use the term page 3 and page 4, and I don't see it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You gotta
I'm sorry. They're on page. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Because I'm looking at it on the iPad, and on the iPad it says what page you're on. So I'm in subsection C.
One thing. I don't know how many pages you put.
Each page counts as one.
Oh, you mean new math? Okay, got it. All right. So this is, you're on the page with the lower right hand corner, D, shall submit an annual summary.
Yes.
Okay.
The change there in subsection C is was made singular from a plural. So just for grammar. The next page starts in the middle of the sentence. In the right-hand column, it's justice issues or Title VI violations. So there's new language here, and this is when the covered agencies submit an annual summary to the Environmental Justice Advisory Council with all the complaints.
Yeah.
So there's new language here that the Advisory Council shall provide any recommendations concerning those reports within 60 days after receipt of the complaint summaries. And then the agencies have to respond within 90 days of receipt of the recommendations.
So we did have a clock running on their timeliness in terms of addressing. Yeah.
Yes. So subsection E has a small change. The A&R in consultation with the council and the Interagency Committee shall review all of the definitions in section 6002 at least every 5 years and recommend changes. Your version just had them looking at the definition of environmental justice population.
Okay. So without 6002 in front of us, that's the block of
Definition.
definitions entirely. Got it.
Subsection F has a couple of changes. So A&R in consultation with the Interagency Committee and the Advisory Council shall issue guidance on how the covered agencies shall determine which investments provide environmental benefits to environmental justice focused populations on or before September 15th, 2023. So they gave them an extra 2.5 months to develop this guidance document. A draft version of the guidance shall be released for a 40-day public comment period. And they reduced it from a 60-day public comment period to a 40-day public comment period. Next, in subsection G, this is the baseline spending report section. Your bill required that the agencies had to do these baseline spending reports by January 15, 2024. They've provided an additional month for February 15, 2024. And that's because they've given A&R an additional 2.5 months. So they wanted to provide a little extra time.
Okay.
They've also changed slightly the language of what's in the baseline spending reports. And so this is G1B, and so it's on the next page. So the baseline spending report shall include a description and quantification of the environmental benefits as an outcome of the investment, as opposed to your language about percentage of overall benefits from those investments.
Okay.
Um,
How the this seems like a more complicated task to define the environmental benefits delivered by the investment, but that's why you're making the investment. Probably it's the covered agency will know what it is.
So that's in H. This is probably one of the larger changes. So your bill previously had a goal that 55% of overall benefits from investments go to environmental justice populations by July 1, 2024. The House language has changed that. So in subsection H, it now reads, on or before July 1, 2024, it shall be the goal of the covered agencies to direct investments proportionately to environmental justice focused populations.
So we're not using any hard numbers, we're just doing proportionate, okay?
You know, I've already voted for the Senate language, but I don't understand this. Our language, I don't understand. We're saying that environmental justice investments ought to go there. Half of our environmental justice investments ought to go to environmental justice. Where does the rest go? Or does the House amendment do away with that question?
I think the House removes part of the strictness of having 55%. So part of the testimony you received is that under the bill as it's currently defined, environmental justice population would probably equal approximately 52% of the state.
Based on those initial 3 criteria.
Yes, under the definition. That was an estimate. But now this is changing it to proportional spending in environmental justice populations. Portions.
Nothing wrong with that. How do you determine what's proportional?
After you've determined what the exact percentage is, so there will be
So
further quantification.
so it's not
You?
The next primary change is down in J at the bottom of the same page. So on or before January 15th, 2025, the agencies shall each issue and publicly post annual report summarizing actions taken to incorporate environmental justice into its policies or determinations. So this language was actually in your section 3 in a session law provision, which struck me as odd. So I moved what language you had in subsection J, which was actually a one-time report from A&R, and I put that in the session law provision. So I just swapped those two sections, but the language is the same.
I'm also noticing back up in I, the date that we have, July 1, 25, January 15, 26. So we
Oh,
pushed back 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that all seems good. We knew that the dates were in flux, and A&R was expressing concern about them. So I'm not surprised to see that they continue to evolve. Okay.
So the next section is in the left-hand column says rulemaking. That should help orient where we are.
Got it.
Okay. So the rulemaking section. There's a couple small changes here. So on or before July 1, 2025, the House is asking to push back when A&R has to do rulemaking on cumulative environmental burdens and implement consideration of cumulative environmental burdens, and then cumulative environmental burdens. So they're giving an extra year to A&R to do rulemaking on that.
Okay. Rulemaking to, sorry, I needed to get familiarize myself here a little bit. So the rulemaking defines
Cumulative environmental.
all these things. With the step 1 is defining a cumulative environmental burden for use by the rest of the rulemaking. And then implement. So this dovetails with the notion of we're defining them. The relationship to this between the proportional effort assigned to environmental justice improvements. Just wanted to make sure. What do we use the rulemaking for? Creating the definition?
Defining cumulative environmental burdens.
Yeah.
That was something your committee had discussed, whether or not you should define it. Implementing cumulative environmental burdens within A&R, and then informing the public and the agencies on how to implement cumulative environmental burdens and use the mapping tool.
Holy.
Yeah, right.
Welcome back. Everybody's here.
How you doing? Senator Weston's chair.
Okay. And then I see the date pushes out to July 26.
Yes, because you're giving A&R an extra year to develop the rules on cumulative environmental burdens. The agencies will need an additional year as well. And so I will also just to refer back in section 6004, the steps that the covered agencies have to take. One of them is considering environmental burdens when they make decisions at the agency level about things. So that's part of the overall package of environmental justice things that agencies need to consider.
Yeah.
So the agency A&R needs to define that first.
Okay. Onward.
Okay. So the House has kept much of the rest of this intact. There's another major change. So the next section is the Environmental Justice Advisory Council and Interagency Environmental Justice Committee.
Got it.
So first, the change is that in subsection B for meetings, which is on the next page, your committee passed that these committees shall meet at least 9 times per year with 4 meetings occurring jointly. The House has changed that to not more than 8 times per year with 4 joint meetings. And then they also added some language. Meetings may be held in person, remotely, or in a hybrid format to facilitate maximum participation, and shall be recorded and publicly posted on the Secretary's website.
I'm not outraged by the change from 8 to 9, 9 to 8.
And that was from the Appropriations Committee. Yep.
I think as significant though is the not more than. Our language actually required them to be
At least now.
whether they needed to or not. Here they have the option of not needing.
Which makes it a lot
Better than, yeah.
So then there's a change in the duties section. The House thought it would be more logical to have the joint duties listed third. So they just rearranged this section so that it starts with the advisory council's duties, then it goes to the interagency's duties, and then it goes to the joint duties. So one change is that your committee had the subsection F that's highlighted, which would allow the advisory council to accept outside funds to give themselves some extra funding. The House has struck that. The House Appropriations struck that.
And that was a weird thing that we knew was a work in progress.
I mean, so the House Natural did actually add a special fund for them to accept funds, but Appropriations struck that as well. So that's not in here.
What is their problem?
It is. I can't speak exactly to why House Appropriations did that, other than it's fairly unusual, and the bill H465 that's currently moving is looking at changing per diem funding for boards and commissions, and so I do think they're not looking to change any. They're keeping consistency until that bill goes into effect.
I mean, it seemed like this session, there was more than one initiative to name a per diem unique to a board, like the cannabis board, I think, got. You see, like, I can't remember which one, maybe it was just cannabis.
Well, the default across the board is $50.
Right.
And that default, which, the vast majority of all boards get, is quite frankly hindering us to get any really normal people to be able to do their boards and commissions. So what came out of Appropriations is the House Appropriations didn't want to set a cap because they said everybody will run right up to the cap immediately. And so we wanted some flexibility to be able to go up. So, so that's, and there's a process to do all of that within the administration for that, so.
Because I think you're right, but it hampers, if you're making $200 a day at your job, to leave to go make 50, that's a bit of a problem.
Well, quite frankly, and I'll go home and, so Joan is on Human Rights Commission. She spends 3 or 4 days reading, because every meeting does at least 1,000 pages of material. A case is normally at least 300 pages. she reads all through that and then gets $50 a day they need.
Yeah, not her reading time at home,
But
not the time that she's working at home.
not the time she's working at home or any of that, and she gets $50 a day. And no, and quite frankly, most people, regardless of which side they're on in the case, when it gets to the Human Rights Commission, isn't happy anyways. We pay the, sorry, this is way out of, but the Human Services Board that says when people make appeals, they get $50 a day. So if you get told you can't get Medicaid coverage for something, you appeal to that board and they get $50.
I was on the District Environmental Commission, the Act 250 Commission, in 1989. And I was getting $50 a day. And at that point, I was so poor, I actually was glad for the money. So, most people, even then, who did it were rich.
Right, well, that's what you get.
Yes, well, you get the very poor. There are people who think, oh, okay, that's some kind of income.
Sorry, that was more
No, that's
history
okay.
than you wanted.
I'm interested,
I want to keep marching on.
Mr. Chairman, just the idea of not,
Marching on,
Yeah.
87.50 a day, 1 day a month.
the idea of not being able, to take money from other sources. I mean, there are philanthropies out there, and they do sometimes put money into government activities. In particular, say education, a lot of companies make grants to education. And I think racial equity and the environment are both the kinds of things that do get philanthropic attention. Why would we not want that?
I think there's a certain awkwardness in having an advisory council a fundraising to support its own activities, as opposed to saying this is an important central obligation of government to a government that has environmental justice front and center. We should fund it ourselves. I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I share your concern. Like, why would we let other funds come in to help? But I think some of it was we should just pay our own way as opposed to ask them to have a big sale.
Yeah. I guess, if Bill Gates decides to donate money, and the commission says, well, poor people in Vermont need more computers, that might be somewhat tainted.
Well, so the council too, I think, so maybe you could speak to this, Mr. Kowski. Could A&R accept funds? If the Gates Foundation said, I think this is great, you have an Environmental Justice Advisory Council, we want to help support the operations of that. Does the state have a way to accept funds? I know you're not an appropriations person, maybe consider questions.
The agency itself is empowered to accept grants, but only there's very specific rules about what kind of grants an agency can receive. But they would not be allowed to filter it down necessarily, specifically to pay people to do their job. You run into some ethics issues when you get there. The House Natural Committee did spend a lot of time deciding how to listing who they could accept funds from, and kept running into optics issues and the appearance of impropriety unless it was limited to just government grants. So they were having a hard time defining a list of who they could accept grants from, and without it appearing improper.
Just be mindful of the time.
I'm almost done. So the other major change is in subsection D on the next page. So previously, the advisory council had 17 members. The House Natural cut that in half-ish to 11 members. So previously, you had 2 representatives from each of the listed organizations, and they've cut it down to 1. And then also it's a goal of having at least 50% reside in environmental justice focused populations. So the same groups are still being represented, but there's only one representative of each, so that it's 11 members.
17 did seem like a lot.
So then the other change is the Interagency Committee. Your version had 12 members. They cut one member, which was the Secretary of Administration. They really went back and forth on this. They actually were gonna add more members, but they've decided that it would be possible for other agency heads to participate voluntarily if they wanted to. And also, the reason they struck the Secretary of Administration is that the Director of Racial Equity is a member of the Agency of Administration.
Okay, oh,
So,
and the,
and she's already a member on both,
both.
yeah.
All right. Oh, here we go with money. Well, sorry, there's another thing.
Yeah, there's a small
May hold
sh-
public hearing.
Yeah, so that language of may hold public hearings, you will recall, is actually back up a couple pages where they're required to do in-person, remote, and hybrid format meetings. So we just moved it up to the beginning.
Okay. Back to money again at the bottom of the page.
Yep, so in subsection F at the bottom of that page, it's that the reference to them accepting outside funds is struck. And then very small changes in the environmental justice mapping tools section. That's when you're looking in the left-hand column. There's just an intro sentence that's added that says ANR shall create and maintain the state environmental justice mapping tool. That really was just sort of clarifying. And then they've pushed back the date for creating it by 1 year. So it's on or before January 1, 2025, the mapping tool shall be available.
Okay.
Section 3 on the next page. So we have just a couple very small changes here at the end. As I mentioned before, I did sort of a language swap with subsection 6004J. So these language, they haven't changed. I just moved their location in the bill for grammar. And then the appropriation check section has changed slightly. So the bill that came out of Senate appropriations had $700,000, $500,000 for the mapping tool, $200,000 for positions, and House appropriations made a couple of small changes to that. So it's still $500,000 to ANR for the mapping tool and for conducting community outreach associated with the work of the Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And then $250,000 is appropriated for the following positions: 1 full-time civil rights compliance director, and 2 new full-time positions to assist in implementing environmental justice state policy, and to support the advisory council. And then they added this language: 1 to be hired after July 1, 2022, and 1 to be hired after December 31st, 2022. So staggered hiring.
Pushing, right? What might have well happened now it's made it staggering.
Yeah, because I think to match up with the money they appropriated. So that is it.
Very much, very helpful. Thank you for preparing the details side by side. So okay, we will, this is up on the floor for action today. I'd like to know what the committee's pleasure is. Are we find this agreeable enough that we would like to concur, or do we want to propose further amendment?
Yeah, having read through it last evening, and I do think it makes most sense to concur at this point.
Doesn't seem to be
Sarah,
doesn't seem to be any substantial departure.
Sarah Weston?
It's not all that substantial.
Yeah.
Okay. So I will report that on behalf of the committee that we recommended the Senate concur with the House will amend the vote is 5-0-0. And I'll describe very briefly the changes. Okay. thank you, everyone.
Like the ending there where you decided to stagger the higher, which certainly beats higher than staggering.
The other bill, I don't know if we ever formally, I think we ever received formally 269, an act is extending the energy savings account partnership pilot program, but we did talk about it. So I need to verify, I don't know for sure who's getting called on to address whether or not, who owns that bill?
Finance.
Finance, okay, so that finance is gonna be the one responding to that. Okay, now that's, I wasn't sure because we did.
But I will just add that, so S269 came back. House Energy and Technology did not make any changes to the extension of the pilot program. However, the House tacked on the weatherization language clarification from OEO,
Yep.
as well as the reauthorization of veggie. But the language that came from OEO was in your S284. So just so you know, that is part of that.
Anything else that you, Senator Camp?
Mr. Chair, where is the technical corrections bill?
That is 446.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to make
And
sure.
it
Okay,
is on a notice today,
great. Okay, thank you. I think that was the only other thing I was looking at.
and that carries 501.
Right.
State, so.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Kowski? I know there's a lot of moving, every day I update a list of where things are, but it leaves me at least half a day behind at some point. Anything else winging its way to us, like SC 34, it's been in limbo for like 2 days. The last action I saw was 5-4, so we still don't have it.
Well, you have it today.
It's gonna get
Bills-
referred today,
Well, yes, bills that
or,
don't get messaged.
Yeah.
Carry over for 1 day.
right, delay day.
Yeah. So it's,
Okay,
so that did pass the House. I don't know if you want to talk about that. The other one is S161, which is the Rygate bill.
okay, so Rygate,
Also didn't formally come out of this committee, but I do think you might have reviewed
right,
it.
came out of finance, but we looked, okay, so with S234, which also has 492 on it,
Yes.
it'll come to the Senate today, okay, so we should plan that beginning of next week. Tune in, have a meeting, there's gonna be a session on a token on Saturday. So when we get back, things that are on notice, things will be ready, will be teed up.
Are you meeting on Monday?
Yes.
Oh, you are, okay.
So, thank you. So token Saturday, Monday session, off we go. I'm just trying to think of when we can you fill us in on 234, even though we don't have a side by side right now?
Yes,
And I
and
don't know
a
if we-
side by side,
I don't know if we need one, but.
yeah, I don't know that you need one either. So, House Natural, oh, I didn't bring 234. Okay, so House Natural, as you know, added the H492 at the end of it. The other thing they did is they added 2 changes that you briefly considered that were part of S226. That was the changing the definition of priority housing project so that NDAs that are priority housing projects can be mixed use projects. Currently under the law, projects and NDAs have to be exclusively housing to be exempt as priority housing projects.
Okay.
So they made that change. They also made the change that simplifies the priority housing project exemption that reads, currently if there's an existing Act 250 permit on a property and the property wants to change to a priority housing project, they have to go through a modified amendment process. It's a shortened amendment process where they check with the original parties to the permit. House Natural has struck that, and so it is just a straight exemption for that as well.
Okay, all right, so those would be pretty discreet and easy to look at.
Those are the two changes. Next, they removed the road rule.
Yes.
They also
Excuse me,
changed.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I have to go to a meeting.
Okay, are you gonna be back before the floor?
Probably we won't be finished before the floor.
Additionally, let's see here. They added intent language to the Snowstone 1 acre amendment.
yeah.
Clarifying that the Snowstone amendment was not intended to change how active a 1 acre jurisdiction is calculated. Then there is a change for wood products.
That this is your Pandora's box concern, right? Like,
Yes,
even though we're clarifying 50 years worth of law, someone could say, well, you just changed it and it opens the question. So now the intent says we are trying to solidify current practice, not open the entire question.
yes, and I actually found an example of that in when the RES was enacted. There was some language in there that I copied because there was a similar issue where they changed all the references to speed to the RES. So I sort of copied that language. So another change they made is they added in the wood products manufacturer section. This is the only area I think that they actually made substantive language changes to. They made a couple of changes to the permit conditions for wood products manufacturer. They made a couple of tweaks to that. But they also added a new section giving wood products manufacturers 1-to-1 mitigation of prime ag soils. So lowering the current mitigation ratio to 1-to-1.
Which is being lowered.
Yeah,
Was
it's
it 2-1 or 3-1?
It's currently between 2-to-1 and 3-to-1, so they're making it 1-to-1.
Which is which? When you use an acre, you save 2 or 3, or when
Yes.
you use 2 or 3 acres, you save 1?
No, you always have to conserve more under the current law, and so this is cutting it to how much you need to conserve.
So there's a proposal to lower how much is,
To be conserved just for wood products manufacturers.
for what?
Wood products manufacturers. That is the,
Wait a second.
Our sawmill component manufacturers language.
When you take an acre of land, it's prime ag soil, you have to set aside prime ag soil that won't be taken in the future. Okay.
yes,
So we're picking and choosing one at a time for individual projects to reduce that number, and for other projects, the number remains the same, if how much you have to save.
yes, it's providing an incentive for a specific industry.
Mr. Chair. I have claimed that to make policy in this building based on what ought to happen. And then we go through a systematic exemption, piece by piece by piece, to show favoritism, love, whatever, and erode the policy. And why do we do that? It's either a good policy or it's not a worthy policy. The soil is the soil, regardless of whether there's a community swimming pool put on it or a sawmill.
And the banner that's over it is, well, you gotta be reasonable.
Is what?
You gotta be reasonable.
It's unreasonable.
I'm not saying that that's what I think, Mark. I said the banner that's put over it, the rationale for it is being reasonable.
I have to bring back a document.
Oh, no. All right, so let's
Was that a
continue with our,
rhetorical question, or do you think he wanted an answer?
anything else beyond the mitigation ratio?
Let me check. Not much else changed.
Is there any document that just flags these things?
No.
Okay. So
We have
I
time
mean,
for,
I sent you the summary chart.
Yeah.
Which we could just go through. I mean, you will know what sections you haven't seen before.
sure.
There's only a couple.
So I think if you can.
talking about body
That's the house.
line, talking about body line.
Yeah.
I just hope you're not shooting the messenger here because I.
Oh, not at all, not at all.
Right.
I mean, I'm shooting myself, probably in the foot.
Fair.
So can we dedicate not more than 45 seconds to this conversation so we can do some other things and then return to this, because we could spend a week on the foibles of the legislature when it comes to
This
policy.
isn't the foibles of the legislature, Mr. Chair. I have a list of 110 possible uses of prime agricultural land for common projects.
Oh my god, I love this.
Okay,
And
like swimming pool.
each of them require mitigation. Are we going to be reasonable and exempt each one individually from the policy we've established? Or are we gonna say, you don't take prime agricultural land without setting aside something else?
I look at Mark.
Well, we apparently never say no.
Well,
Nice. It really gets, that really is operating on, the rhetoric is really gets down to that.
so I
Why don't
think,
we repeal this place in law that says you have to set aside prime ag land when you consume something, and just repeal that, because every time someone wants not to have to follow that law, they're granted an exemption.
did that happen with airports?
It happens with airports.
It didn't happen.
It happens with interstate highway exchanges.
Okay, so it didn't.
It happens with hospitals. It happens with schools, post offices, police barracks. Yeah,
Right.
there's 109 of them. And that's just a list that I put together.
So I think how this happened, as I understand this, there was a very sort of active rural economic development working group that included you went on one of their tours, right? They spent a lot of time looking at the wood products industry. They wanted to do more things to support that industry, and I think this is a manifestation of that's their way of showing more support, reducing the cost to develop in this way because you have less land to, you're obligated to find less land to conserve.
Take that one, Mr. Chair.
I'm
We
not
listen
arguing for it, I
to the
explain.
Senate talk about a workforce shortage in this state, and we're not getting people, we don't have the people to do the jobs we need to do. And we have folks going to the Rygate plant advocating that we pay more for electricity so we can hire foresters to cut down trees, to burn them, to make electricity that's more expensive than renewable electricity we can buy, thereby denying those people going into other jobs that need to be filled. And we're doing it for whom? For whom? Out
It's a
of
rhetorical
courtesy
question.
or out of heartfelt feelings?
So that's a good segue to Rygate.
We're doing it.
No, one other thing. So
Myopia is looking at the particular issue as though it did not have ramifications outside itself.
We set policy and then we grant, and then we stand up and compliment each other and thank them for taking up an issue where we subverted our own policy to take care of the poor, unfortunate.
Okay, let's say I agree with you. What are you suggesting?
That we stick to our policy.
That's what I thought. Okay, so on this proposed amendment, we should oppose it. You want to ask for confidence?
If the policy is to protect agricultural land when you use it, yes, we stick with the policy. Pardon?
Are you coming back before floor?
Yes, I am.
If the policy is to develop as fast as can, we should give a tax break every time someone consumes agricultural land.
Okay, just so you would like you are suggesting we ask for a conference.
Oh, I would, I would suggest that, but yeah, I would suggest that. I would say, no, let the damn
I'm
bill
with you,
die.
I'm with you, I agree. Or we could do it as, I forget how many times this has gone back and forth. Can we do
Just
further
once.
amendment, or is it too
Well,
late for that?
If we're interested in killing the bill, I would think we would concur with further proposal. I think we might make it
Which bill is this?
our Act 250 bill with the governance bill attached.
It also added the municipal bylaw modernization grants. So basically it took all of the,
What was the last one? I'm sorry.
grants, municipal bylaw modernization grants.
Oh,
So that was part of, it took all of the natural resources parts of S226 and put it in 234. And so that is language you have reviewed before and that the Senate already passed.
Does it add more money again this year? Is there another tranche of money?
Yes, it's of the 800,000 that's being appropriated to the municipal and regional planning fund, up to $650,000 can be used for these grants.
So, thank you.
You all set?
Paul said I just sent it to the print room.
Okay.
To get 45 copies to bring to the floor.
Okay, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. It is being offered by Senator McCormick.
Yes.
Okay, all right, got it.
Thank you. All right, great. So
I'm gonna hand it to you.
I'm gonna-
I'm not gonna throw it at you. See, that's it.
it's just very bring a gentle man. Okay. All right, so we want to just double check. Let's, I would say, we have 3/5 of the committee here, but so I understand your position. And I guess the question is, to what degree do we want to act on it and in what way?
On
You would
the,
like to have a committee of conference?
or kill the bill. Whatever, right? Yeah. But which is the reason we get to the end of these sessions is so that we can do the sort of ultimate
What are
hypocrisy.
you doing with
On our
the
policies.
board? The environmental board, which is 492, which is tacked onto our Act 250 bill.
Yeah,
So, well, that's another whole topic for discussion. You know, the House has sent that to us, on back on our bill. And, so we'll,
how much money is there in that? I just went and put this in the tracking document, what we just did with environmental justice,
okay,
because that's 50,000, it wasn't counted.
right. 52, 500, 200, 500, 250.
Yeah, it's 50,000 not accounted for because the House conferees have told us that they stayed within the box. Well, that's not within the box, it's 50,000 more. So it just got added to the tracking document.
And maybe just make sure, because the civil rights position changing from a half-time to a full-time is part of the discussion, and so I don't know if that was elsewhere in the budget.
Yeah, we had pulled it out in the budget
Right.
when we did the budget, so.
Yeah, okay.
And we pulled it out of the central office in
Okay.
natural resources, so.
Okay.
But this is in the tracking document now.
Okay.
So, Senator McDowell, you're on track to, this is offensive enough, kill the bill. Got it. We're talking about our Act 250 bill, which is back to the House with provision that changes the prime ag soil mitigation ratio for wood products industry folks from 2 or 3 to 1 to 1 to 1.
So it isn't a full exemption, it's just cutting it in half. It's not a full exemption. I know, I don't want to argue for this, but
No, I'm
I'm
just,
trying to think of which of 6
so
silly things to say.
That's
Response to
I'm
that, so I'll
asking
say
really
none.
what its pleasure is in terms of responding to the House. So we're fine on the EJ bill. We don't have, this isn't up for action today, but we may not sit down together again before this is on.
We need a chance to look at the bill and.
Okay, so Ellen, have you sent us, Mr. Kowski, you already sent us a summary document for that?
No, I sent it to you,
Okay.
but I
Can
can,
you send it to the rest of us?
sure,
Yeah.
I didn't know we were doing this today.
And
Nor I, but I saw an opportunity.
is there anything else tacked onto that bill? Is that where they tack the environmental board or restructuring?
Yes, that's the big
Kill it.
492.
Well, I think perhaps someone in the House might tell you that they tacked on the environmental board with the wood products changes to provide some balance.
So I think.
Can I see the side by side?
So when, we'll get that document, and that will be helpful to have a conversation.
So, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
If I would say that calmer or rational, that the standard for preserving 3 acres for every 1 acre was a compromise for those who thought that for every acre you developed, you want to preserve 6. And because we were reasonable people and wanted to be cooperative, we, lowered it to 3. And now one at a time, we're taking that 3 and we're cutting it to 2 and to 1. If you ask me what has changed around here in 30 years, I may be wrong, I just didn't realize it when I got here. Is that we set standards and policy, and then we thank each other on the floor of the Senate for having broken those standards and done special little gifts for folks. And the laws then begin to not mean what they are on the books.
On the merits, Mark, I'm convinced, I'm with you on the merits. Now we get to the idea that it is the end of the session.
Which is,
And so I guess I have 2 questions. One is, would further amendment have
Oh,
an
yeah.
effect upon the bill? And secondly, is it, if that is the case, is it worth it?
Thank you very much.
Is this obnoxious enough to justify killing the bill?
of course, it's worth it if you don't put any value to preserving agricultural land and give it away every time at every opportunity to please somebody at the expense of what we have established as policy.
So with an eye towards, can we stay another minute?
I could go and talk about the bottom bill, the terrible afternoon.
So can you stay one more minute? Here, so at the end of 2 years of duty, this committee, we're not getting to do this very ceremoniously, but every member of this committee
Thank you.
gets a.
From the
Are we
wood
gonna go out to
products
dinner next week?
Well, is this from the
We
wood
go out to
products
dinner,
industry?
you should give us those then.
Is this from the wood products industry?
Yours slipped out of the bag.
Oh yeah, that's exactly, I'm sure mine slipped out of the bag.
Is this from the wood products industry?
See you soon.
Oh,
That is in Middlebury, Vermont. It's Vermont,
Paid for or gratuitous?
paid for.
Is this a gift from you?
Yes.
Thank you,
That's
Mr.
that's
Chairman.
how people in this committee have names at the end of a biennium for your.
Take it back, we hasn't, we're not done yet.
So you and Senator West didn't have it, but now you've reached the end of the biennium. Senator Campion's is gone missing. I'm not sure where his is. But so thank you for your service and, Vince used to have those ones that looked like a tombstone. I thought.
Well, because he plugged you with it. He gave them to you at the beginning of your service. And beat you with it.
I thought it was nice that yeah, so you'll see a few of them around. Senator Parent has one, Senator Pearson has one. Now you two have a rock maple. All right, so.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for your work, which isn't over yet, but, so you'll send us that summary, we'll look at it, we'll take an official position when people have had a chance to review it, Senator Westman hasn't had a chance to see it, Senator Campion hasn't seen it at all. There was one more thing for today. I
Yes,
need to remind myself.
shall we risk Senator McDonald's blood pressure going up further?
Sure, what is it? Right?
Reigate.
So sure, let's talk about Reigate for a minute.
Um,
Have you got your seatbelt on? All right, ready to go. What
So-
happened with Reigate?
the Senate, passed a 1-year extension. The House basically took Dylan's language, and then added a couple of additional reports. So it's an extension until 2032, unless terminated earlier. And there's basically
Unless
terminated
terminated.
earlier, because there's basically every year a check-in that Reigate has to do on whether or not they've built, have they contracted for, have they built, and are they running a co-location project that increases their efficiency by 50% based on the 2022 efficiency.
Efficiency for what?
I know, it's a little vague.
How do you
so
define
bas-
efficiency?
It's phrased as above the, let's see, where is the language?
They offering electricity at market rates?
The plant's overall efficiency to be increased by at least 50% relative to the 12-month period preceding July 1, 2022. So the 12-month overall efficiency of the plant
How do you define efficiency in the law?
is not defined.
Well, I declare it been achieved.
DPS is charged with verifying that the efficiency has been met.
Based on what criteria?
Yeah. We had a lot of trouble with this term before.
It's overall efficiency, so
Sure, which means there's a list of criteria to cover all the things over which they will be calculating. What's the list of criteria?
there isn't a specific one. It's not specific to the generation of electricity. It will be whatever is co-located at the site as well.
Well, if the House were here, what would they say was their list of criteria to be evaluated?
So they have to construct a facility that uses the excess thermal heat for a beneficial purpose.
Okay, which is a monetary thing which they could use to reduce the cost of electric sales. And they would be able to sell it at market rates.
So board order, so then find this, Reigate is actually being referred back to finance, right?
I mean, it's not being referred specifically, it's on the proposal amendment calendar for today, so I don't know if finance is gonna have it specifically referred, or if they're
Or
gonna
just
consider
pass over it. I mean,
pass over it, or maybe seek conference committee.
I was in committee most of yesterday.
We're not gonna get this, it's gonna go to finance.
No, I'm just saying, I don't remember this coming up in finance yesterday. Thank you. Even, no, we didn't.
Yeah, they haven't had me in, but, so anyways, it's entirely different than what the Senate passed.
Okay, so this is a heads up to watch for this in finance, okay? Anything else that you know of interest to us that's on the verge of landing on in our chamber? For 201, well, that's it. Michael already compared those. 201, I believe is either voted out or on the verge of being voted out of the House Natural.
Well, so all of my other bills, I think, are covered. The only other thing is, that Senator Strachan asked for a committee of conference on S101.
Yes. He asked if I would join that. I think it's because of the municipal hookup and sewer
Yes,
question.
yes.
which we addressed
It's the only part of S two
2 and 3
26.
and 4 years ago. Okay.
Yeah, had the House took it out once again. So this
Okay.
is the second year in a row that they've killed those pieces.
Still don't like that.
So-
Okay. All right. So with that,
What are some jobs that we're short on this?
Ledge council.
legislative lawyers, that would be one. Okay, thanks so much for your help this morning. We'll watch for the 234 report summary. And then I'll call a huddle on the fly for us to have an official position on it. But at least for the thing that's up today, in EJ 148, I can report our position. Thanks.